I mentioned yesterday that we had divided the chairs a little bit differently in the sanctuary. This is a different view. You can see how we have 6 feet between each row. That's plenty of space for you and your family to spread out. If you bring your kids, bring a blanket, let them lay on the floor. It's okay. We'll have things for them to do, and we're going to reorganize our church service a bit differently so that the kids aren't just being tolerated, they are participating in our worship. So today, as we go back to the book of Mark, Jesus has spent the night in prayer. He's sent his disciples ahead of him. He's told them where to meet in Bethsaida. Verse 47, when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Apparently a wind blew up and it was going exactly the opposite way that the disciples wanted to go. So they lowered the sails and they began to row. Now think of what the disciples were going through. They'd spent weeks in ministry. They were tired. Then they spent a day ministering to the crowd. They were tired from that. Jesus doesn't give them a night to sleep. He tells them, go ahead and meet me in Bethsaida. And so they start to cross, and now they have to row. They are exhausted. You know the story, how Jesus begins to walk to Bethsaida, but the directest route to Bethsaida is a straight line. And so he walks on top of the water. The disciples see this thing walking on top of the water, and they assume it's a ghost. They begin to cry out. They were absolutely terrified. And immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, take courage, it's I, don't be afraid. He climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed. Now, the interesting thing to me here is that in spite of the fact that Jesus was their mentor, he was the person who was leading this group, they didn't recognize him because what they saw was something completely new. Sometimes it's hard to see Jesus when he does something completely new. We become used to seeing him in the things that we have always seen. The same thing happened to the prophet in the Old Testament, Prophet Elijah. Listening for God's word, comes to a cave. At the mouth of the cave, he sees a storm. God had spoken through the storm before. He saw fire. God had spoken on Mount Sinai in fire. He saw an earthquake. God had spoken in the earthquake before. But God was in none of those. Then he heard a still, small voice telling him what to do. Something completely new. What about you? Do you look for Jesus in the new things that are happening to you? We have a lot of novelty in these days. So much of our life is new. Do you intentionally look for Jesus in the new things that are happening? I encourage you to do just that today. Look for Jesus in the new things that are happening. God bless you. Tomorrow we'll finish the week looking at the very end of this story.